Before beginning the story, I'd like to say a big thank you for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading alternate history-related stories every single day. If that sounds good, be sure to leave a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a whole lot when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. I found it while looking for an old client's contact information. I'd done a sign installation for a restaurant on the east side of the city about 3 years ago, and the restaurant had changed ownership, and the new owner wanted the sign modified and had called my company looking for the original installer. My boss had passed the job to me. I'd pulled the old work order, and the client contact listed on it was a web address rather than a phone number or email, which wasn't unusual for businesses that managed their vendor contacts through their site. I typed the address and hit enter. The wrong page loaded. Not a restaurant, not a business, a personal website, the kind that used to be common before social media absorbed most of that kind of publishing. A plain template site with a blog format. The domain was close enough to the restaurant's address that I understood the typo immediately. I'd transposed 2 letters. I was about to close the tab when the most recent post loaded. It was a photograph of me, not a photograph I recognized. I was in it clearly, my face, my build, wearing a canvas work jacket I owned, standing in what looked like a hardware store aisle. The photo was taken from slightly behind and to the left, the angle of someone nearby who'd taken the shot without being noticed. The light in the store was the flat overhead light of a place that prioritized function over atmosphere. And I was reaching for something on a shelf, and I looked like a man on his lunch break, running an errand, which was what I did at hardware stores. I stared at it for a moment, then I scrolled down. The post before it was another photograph of me. The post before that was another one. I scrolled back through 6 years of daily posts, and they were all photographs, all of a man who was me or close enough to me that the distinction required close examination, and none of them were photographs I'd ever taken or been knowingly photographed for. I closed the laptop and went to make coffee and stood in the kitchen for a while. My name is Reed Falk, and I install and maintain commercial signage for a regional company that handled everything from lit storefront letters to billboard installations to the large LED displays that went above gas stations and shopping centers. The work put me on lifts and ladders across about a 4-county area, and I spent most of my days at height, moving between jobs in a truck loaded with equipment, the kind of work that made you methodical and patient with your own body, because a lapse in either quality at height had serious consequences. I was practical by nature and by training, and I took the practical approach to the website, which meant I went back to it and looked at it carefully rather than avoiding it or immediately catastrophizing. The site had been registered 6 years and 4 months ago. Domain registered to a privacy service, so no registrant information was available. It had no text, no captions, no identifying information of any kind. Just the photos, 1 per day, every day. No gaps in the posting schedule. 6 years of daily photographs of a man who looked like me. I looked at the photographs closely, and the differences accumulated slowly. The work jacket I wore in the hardware store photo was mine, an exact match. But in a photo from 8 months ago, I was wearing a jacket I didn't own. Similar cut, different color. The kind of small variation that could mean anything or nothing. In a photo from 4 years back, I was standing in front of a truck that was the same make and year as mine, but a different color. In a photo from 2 years ago, I was with a woman I didn't recognize at what looked like a holiday dinner, seated at a table with a familiarity that suggested she was not a new acquaintance, her hand resting close to his on the tablecloth in the way hands rested when people had been at tables together for a long time. I'd been single for 3 years. Before that, I'd been with someone named Kara, who was nothing like the woman in the photo. The life in the photographs was close to mine, close enough to confirm that the subject was me, or a version of me, with enough small divergences to confirm that it was not exactly mine. Same work, same general geography, different details, the kind of differences that accumulated from one divergence years ago, one choice made differently, and then compounded naturally the way choices did. I spent a week going through the full archive before I was sure of what I was looking at. The shift in the photos happened about 3 weeks after I found the site. I'd been checking it daily, which I told myself was research, and which was probably also something more difficult to name, the specific pull of looking at evidence of yourself that you didn't put there. I'd developed enough familiarity with the visual language of the posts to notice when it changed. The change was in the framing. The photos had always been taken without the subject's apparent awareness. Casual angles, the documentation of someone going about their day without performing for a camera. Then, on a Tuesday, the most recent post was a photo of me at a diner counter, and it was taken from the front, and I was looking toward the camera, and my expression was the expression of a person looking at something they hadn't expected to see, not at the camera specifically, but in the general direction of where the camera had been. The post after that was similar, and the one after that. The other read had noticed someone was looking at the site and was adjusting the documentation accordingly. He'd been posting for 6 years to an audience of no one, and now there was one reader, and the photographs were beginning to account for that fact. I found that more unsettling than the original discovery. The original discovery was strange. This was a response. I found the comment function on the older posts buried in the template settings, disabled by default. I enabled it on my end by accessing the site's public interface in a way the template allowed, which was a minor technical step that took about 20 minutes to figure out. I didn't know if it would work, didn't know if the comment would land somewhere the other read could see it. I left a comment on the most recent post. I said, "I found the site. I know what I'm looking at. Tell me what you need me to know." I checked back the next morning. The next post was a photograph of the billboard on Highway 9 at the junction with the county road, the large double-sided installation that my company maintained on a quarterly schedule. I'd been up that billboard 3 times in the past year for routine checks. It was a standard job, nothing unusual about the site, the kind of installation I could service in my sleep from years of repetition. The photo was of the billboard from below, taken from the access road, and the framing was deliberate. The billboard centered, clearly the subject of the photograph rather than background. The other read had gone to that specific location to take that specific photograph, and there was nothing casual about the composition. I left another comment. I said, "I work that site. What about it?" The next post was the same billboard from a different angle. and in the bottom corner of the frame, partially visible, was the other reed's hand holding something, a phone, and on the phone's screen, barely legible at that resolution, text that read, "Boundary, thin, stop going there." The comment exchange that followed over the next 2 weeks was the strangest communication I'd ever had, conducted in photographs and comments on a 6-year-old personal website between two versions of the same person trying to convey technical information through a format designed for casual, personal documentation. The other reed had been watching the boundary situation at the Highway 9 site for over a year. He'd identified it as a thinning crossing point through the same kind of slow observation that preceded understanding in these situations something wrong in a specific place, gradually becoming more clearly wrong, eventually becoming something he had a framework for. He'd had more time than I had to develop that framework, apparently, because he'd been living adjacent to the same situation and had been working through it longer and with more of the context that came from being close to it consistently. The billboard site sat on the thinnest crossing point in the corridor, a geographic location where the two timelines pressed directly against each other. Every time a person with a connection to both sides, meaning someone who existed in both timelines, spent extended time at that location, the boundary thinned incrementally. I worked the site on a quarterly schedule, 4 visits a year, and had been doing so since I joined the company 7 years ago. 7 years of quarterly visits at a thin crossing point, every visit narrowing the boundary a fraction. The other reed had figured out that his own visits to the site, from his side, were doing the same thing from the other direction. 2 versions of the same person, both tied to the site through the same job, both narrowing the same boundary from opposite sides, the cumulative effect accelerating the thinning faster than either of us individually could have managed. He'd done the rough math, and the picture it produced was not a comfortable one. He'd stopped going to the site 14 months ago, routing his jobs away from that corridor, taking the scheduling hit without explaining it to his boss. He'd been trying to find a way to tell me to do the same. The website had been the only channel he could find. 6 years of photographing his own life, updating daily, waiting for this version of himself to stumble across it by accident or by search, understanding that the odds were low, but that low was better than none. The typo that had brought me to the site was mine, was genuinely accidental, and had taken 6 years to occur. I thought about that for a while. 6 years of daily posts on the slim chance that an accidental misdirect would eventually land someone on the right page. The kind of patience that required a long view and a willingness to act on possibility rather than probability. I talked to my boss about the Highway 9 site and told him I had a conflict of interest in the location that I couldn't fully explain, but that I'd prefer to pass to another technician on a permanent basis. He was the kind of manager who accepted that kind of statement from a long-term reliable employee without demanding elaboration, and he reassigned the site within a week. I left a comment on the next post explaining what I'd done. The post that followed was a photograph of a road taken from a moving vehicle, the highway receding in the frame, the other reed driving away from something. Then the next post was a photograph of a different job site entirely, an ordinary commercial sign on an ordinary building in what looked like a residential neighborhood, a man doing his work in an unremarkable location with no boundary implications and no particular significance. Just a job. The relief of just a job was visible in the framing. The post after that was the last one. The site went static after that. No new posts, no further comments. The last 6 years of documentation sitting in its template, the way things sat when they were finished, complete as a record without being ongoing as an activity. I checked it a few more times over the following weeks out of habit, and then less often, and then occasionally. The boundary at the Highway 9 site, whatever condition it had been in, was no longer my problem to worry about in a practical way, since I was no longer going there. I thought sometimes about the 6 years of photographs, the daily commitment of it, one photograph every day for 6 years, maintaining the documentation against the possibility that this version of himself would eventually find it and understand it. That was a particular kind of patience, the kind that required believing in the usefulness of what you were doing without any confirmation that it was working until it did. I understood it better than I might have because of the nature of my own work, which involved the same kind of long-term maintenance, the quarterly visits and the structural checks, and the belief that the regular attention to something would prevent the failure that inattention allowed. You did the work because the work kept the structure sound, and you kept doing it because the structure needed it, and some years the structure gave you nothing back except its continued functioning, which was the whole point. The other read had kept the site updated for 6 years because the situation needed it. No confirmation, no feedback, no indication that any of it was reaching anyone until one Tuesday afternoon when a misdirected search landed the right person on the wrong page. The last photograph was still the most recent post on the site the last time I checked. It was a self-portrait, the other read holding the camera at arm's length, his face clear in the frame. I spent some time with it, more time than I'd spent with any of the other photos, because it was the first one in 6 years that showed his face directly and without the documentary remove of the others. No pretense of candid documentation. He looked like me. The specifics were there. The same face I'd been looking at in mirrors my whole life. The same particular configuration that was mine before it was his, or his before it was mine, depending on how you thought about it. A little more tired around the eyes than I felt on most mornings. Or maybe the tiredness was the same, and I just wasn't used to seeing it from the outside. The hair was slightly different, longer on the sides, the kind of difference that accumulated from years of going to different barbers in different neighborhoods. The expression was the one I recognized because I'd made it myself at the end of jobs that had gone right, but cost something in the going. The specific look of completion that wasn't quite satisfaction, because satisfaction didn't carry that weight. The look of a person who had finished something they needed to finish and was now standing on the other side of it, taking stock. He was looking directly into the camera. I looked back at him for a while. Then I closed the tab and went back to work. The highway corridor ran its ordinary traffic in both directions, and the billboard on the junction stood where it had always stood, maintained now by someone else. And the boundary at that location was whatever it was, stabilizing or not. And either way, it was no longer something I was making worse. The next job was a restaurant sign on the south side of the city that needed a new LED module, a 2-hour job at most, nothing unusual about the location. I drove there and did the work.